The Powering Procurement podcast is brought to you by Atamis, source to contract software designed to save you time and money. Hello and welcome to Powering Procurement, a podcast by Atamis, where we unpack the world of procurement and supply chain management with the help of industry leaders. I'm your host, Lloyd, and this is our resident expert, Gareth Burch.
Hi, after 20 years in procurement, I may be billed as an expert, but believe me, I'm here to learn too.
Each episode, together with our expert guests, we'll dive into specific challenges and opportunities facing the procurement industry today.
And we'll explore easy wins and longer-term strategies to help you rise to the challenge of driving value through your work while showcasing the power of procurement.
So let's get going. Welcome to Powering Procurement. Today we are honoured to be joined by Professor Jane Lynch, a leading voice in the field of procurement and an academic professor at Cardiff Business School. Jane's incredible career spans decades of research, teaching and practical influence in procurement, with a special focus on delivering public value. She currently leads the Centre of Public Value Procurement at Cardiff University and has been a driving force behind innovative projects such as embedding social value into procurement and achieving net zero social housing in Wales.
Jane's work is transforming how we think about procurement, not just as a transactional function, but as a strategic lever for social, environmental, and economic change with a mindset we're completely aligned with. Her insights are helping shape procurement policies in Wales and beyond, creating meaningful impact through initiatives like the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. Today, we'll discuss how procurement can act as a driver for economic policy, foster innovation, and help solve some of the biggest challenges of our time. Welcome to the podcast, Jane.
Thank you for that very grand introduction. Let's hope I can fulfill your ambitions here.
Jane, you absolutely deserve it. It's great to have you here with us today, and we're really looking forward to delving into some of your experience that I know you can share with us on the Powering Procurement podcast. To begin with, we always like to get a sense of who our special guests are. You've had such an impact over the years, but it'd be great to hear a little bit about your journey and why you chose procurement really as your research field, your speciality.
Okay, how long have you got? It's an interesting one. Well, I think if we start with where we are, I'm a grandma of three, so that kind of puts you in the age bracket. A very proud grandma of three. But no, all joking aside, I grew up in a family business and worked in the family business from a very early age, and instantly even realised that, having supply shortages brought sad faces. I then had a very unusual career route. I started off as a clothes designer. I did very well at that, but it wasn't really, in terms of income, it wasn't really stable enough. So I took on a management graduate scheme in a department store, and then eventually became assistant buyer from various departments, and still in touch with those people, even though it was the 1990s that I kind of left the retail market and went back to university to retrain. So when I had my children, 1992, 1994, I went back to university to train 2 nights a week for quite a number of years, and then just kind of fell into teaching, I suppose. Started off teaching about retail buying and the changes that were happening at that time with overseas sourcing. So procurement has really kind of, been a part of every step of the way of what I do, really. And it was really public sector procurement is where I am now. But I mean, that's certainly not obviously how I started my journey, and it was really the volunteering work that I did with CIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, and realising that everybody else in the committee was working in the public sector. And I thought, I don't really know much about public sector. This was about 2010. And somebody said, "What do you do, Jane?" I said, "Well, I try to teach procurement, but, listening to you, maybe there's a bit more that I need to know." So that's how the conversation started, and I was hooked. My first piece of work was in 2013 with Welsh Government, exploring the contracts that had been measured through community benefits measurement tool, understanding the additional value that was created from large construction projects. And I guess it was really that project that really got me to really take up the interest and the whole. It's not a job now or a career, it's a lifestyle. You eat, sleep and breathe it 24/7 now. But yeah, I'm very proud to love procurement.
That's absolutely great to hear. And Gareth and I have met you, Gareth, obviously a lot more than I have, but whenever we meet you, Jane, your love of procurement certainly shines through. And I suppose from the understanding that I have of your work and your passion at this stage, it's very much about procurement driving social value and societal change as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, what I haven't emphasised in that very brief description about how I got to where I am today is that I do feel that, academia is certainly something that I didn't anticipate early on in my career. But I now feel that I have obviously put in the hours to get where I am. I feel it's a very privileged position. And I feel that it's important that you use that position to deliver meaningful outcomes for people who need it most. And of course, that really speaks the volume of what can be achieved with procurement, the power of procurement. And I think while I'm very passionate about procurement per se, what I'm passionate about is about responsible procurement, about when we're buying goods and services, thinking about who we're buying them from, who's being impacted by that, and the decision making that goes on in the organisation. And I guess because of my experience of working with different organisations of different governance structures, I started to appreciate how decisions made in the business can have an impact on you as individuals in your department, the way you act, the processes that you follow, your reporting mechanisms and so on. And so that kind of that experience resonated with me very much when we look at public sector procurement and the accountability that's necessary to make sure that when we're spending taxpayers' money, let's look at it, 320 billion of it a year, approximately, that's a considerable amount of money. And imagine that that's all being invested to help and support people who need it most in communities in and around the UK. That's what I'm really passionate about.
So, Jane, Wales has been at the forefront of embedding social and environmental principles. What, for you, has been the most surprising or inspirational outcome of this approach?
So I think, first of all, I'm part of a research group called IRSP, International Research Study on Public Procurement. And I was invited to join the academic team back in 2013, following the work that I did on community benefits. And definitely at that point of time, without a doubt, Wales is considered to be, part of the UK as a developing country, but actually we've got some of the most poverty-stricken communities, not just in the UK, but across Europe, 27 countries as we were part of then. Those are quite alarming statistics, and that means that whatever we're doing isn't enough. We need to do more of it. And so I think really the work that I was delivering for Welsh Government at that time was of interest to the wider global platform. And we actually ran a global workshop, inviting leaders of procurement from across the globe to talk about how they embed community benefits into their procurement. And it was interesting that actually some of the most developed countries were doing the least, almost like you seem to go full cycle. But actually what we found in our study, and we published a book chapter on it, Public Value book, was really that actually some of the least developed countries are doing the most. And it almost seems like you start off on this journey where everything that you spend is there to help and support local communities and individuals within there, helping them to upskill, to gain employment opportunities where they perhaps wouldn't have been previously. But then as they become more and more developed and cost becomes this obsession for far too long with governments where it's all about lowest possible costs, you start to strip out all of that benefit and you lose that benefit, the potential that can happen. So I think what I was really inspired by in Wales is that it started with the conversation, the Wales We Want campaign. I can't remember the year exactly, but it was quite a number of years where a consultation process was conducted across Wales, asking various stakeholders, everybody from somebody on the high street to people in public sector roles to business professionals and so on. What would you like Wales to look like by 2050? From those conversations, they developed a bill, and from that they developed an act called the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act 2015. And that act provided a framework that said to anybody in the public sector, You can now do things differently. You can now make a difference with your spend. So for me, that was a pivotal point really for Wales. This was an opportunity for us to get things right, to correct where there had been too much emphasis on short-term thinking, on maybe more transactional relationships rather than collaborative relationships, and really thinking about what is it we're trying to achieve. So the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act is based on 7 goals and 5 ways of working. And if you like, that becomes, I would refer to it as our North Star. I think it's important for people living and working in a country to know what they're trying to achieve overall. There's what you're trying to achieve for your business or you as an individual, but ultimately, why do we exist? What is it we're trying to achieve collectively that will make things better tomorrow than they are today? And what I really loved about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act is this emphasis on future generations. And I always remember the words of Sophie Howe, the then Future Generations Commissioner, saying, we can't necessarily change today's problems, but we can prevent tomorrow's. And I really, really pull back on those words, time and time again, and think about what can we prevent, what are preventative measures that we can put in place. And I do very much see procurement professionals at the forefront of that. They're very much the gateway to the business community, able to really think hard and fast about how we go about procuring goods and services for the public sector in Wales. So I think that act has really put us on a global map, but also it means that everybody's looking at what we're doing, and it means that we have to now deliver results from that. So there's a lot I could talk about there, of course.
I love the concept of the North Star, and it's something I've tried to utilize, maybe not as effectively as I would like to think it was, but I think it's a great concept to align people. But one of the things I always find quite interesting is how you bring and align the academic viewpoints to the deliverable viewpoints, because sometimes it doesn't necessarily align. And the academic research is actually quite powerful to help drive direction. But from a day-to-day perspective, people may not buy into it as much as you'd like.
Okay, it's great. Great topic. Gosh, but that's definitely about another 3 hours taken here. Okay, let's see where I can start with this one, because I'm not your traditional academic, as you've already picked up. However, I have an obligation and a duty as part of Cardiff University to publish. There's a different language, slightly different language, more conceptual. One of the things that kind of irritates me slightly is when people talk about, well, what's the real world? Are you engaged in the real world? And actually, I'm in the Logistics and Operations Management section of Cardiff Business School. Cardiff Business School has a public value strategy, which says that actually we do much more than just churn out the next Enron, corrupt financiers. We do much more than that. And that really resonates a lot with us in our Logistics and Operations Management section, because we're all about relationships. We're all about supply chain. We're all about building resilience. We're all about being agile. We're all about reducing risk. And so it's something that really resonates strongly with us. We're about 35 academics in the logistics section on operations, logistics, supply chain, forecasting, obviously procurement, modern slavery, a whole raft of things. So I think really point about, and all of us are doing applied research. So I'm not saying that there isn't some research which is purely conceptual, hypothetical. Supposing we put these constructs together, instantly, let's think about sustainability. Sustainability in nearly all of the academic studies, it's a very, very well-trodden path, yeah? And the basic principles of sustainability are societal, economic, environmental. And in Wales, and also some other academic authors would add the fourth dimension, which is cultural. So there's science behind all of those, but we use them in a practical and applied way, don't we? Yeah. And so here's a good example of how you're breaking down a concept, which is sustainability. I'm getting a bit animated now. And you can actually then think about, okay, so there are 4 elements to sustainability as we know them. Let's think about how they interrelate with each other. Actually, then let's look about some of the trade-offs that might happen when you're trying to balance those pillars of sustainability. And that's why you have to keep, applying that theory, that knowledge, and understanding how you do that. So Yeah, I mean, there's constant debate, even in the academic level, about the extent to which you embed theories. And I've got 2 books full of theories. They give us a lens, a way of thinking about something, a perspective of thinking about something. It's a bit like if you're looking at it from a public sector lens or a private sector lens or a third sector lens. Are they really any different? Maybe not, but actually what we're trying to achieve at the end of it will be slightly different. So it's exactly the same in academia. And actually, science underpins pretty much everything that we do. In fact, on a recent trip to Milan, I went to the Leonardo da Vinci Museum, and even I was staggered at just how much we owe that individual and the people that he employed around him. Pretty much every moving part that we use in our world today comes from Leonardo da Vinci. And there's science. Science has underpinned the way that we behave, the things that we use, rowing boats, turning wheels, anything that you can think of. So, science and its application, you can only, you can hypothetically come out with some conceptual idea, but to actually make it happen, you have to apply it in practice. And that's what I think we're particularly good at Cardiff.
Yeah, what I'm picking up from both of you, actually, Jane and Gareth, is delivery, and perhaps taking that a step forward, but also one step back to what you were talking about, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, Jane, which was brought in 2015, wasn't it? So some years ago now. Looking perhaps and focusing on the outcomes of that so far, are there any inspiring or surprising outcomes that have so far been delivered?
That's a really good question, actually, because I was involved in the research element of a review across the whole public sector in Wales, 44 public bodies, who are mandated to be guided by the principles of the Act and to be able to demonstrate that they're embedding them into their procurement in Wales. And what we actually looked at was, first of all, whether they had a strategy, whether there was any evidence of any of the language that was used in the Act, whether we could see evidence of that. We also looked at contracts, so in the tendering process, looking at PIN notices and so on, whether, again, there was any language in there. And I have to say that in 2018-19, we were a bit disappointed. We thought there was going to be a lot more development, but what it did highlight is that there's a lot of passion to do the right thing. The procurement people are really committed to do the right thing, but they're being held back or feel constrained by one of 2 things: finance, budget constraints, 30% year-on-year budget costs. How can you do more with less and still be sustainable? Quite a challenge. The other one is really thinking that, we have to follow a particular process. So there was a lot going on at that particular period, which was preventing a lot of things. Having said that, there were a lot of really great practices going on. So we know it is possible. What I identified in that piece of research, and have continued to do so since, is what that says is when you embed sustainability into your procurement, that isn't enough. You can't expect procurement to deliver if the rest of the organisation don't also follow those principles. So when you're embedding something like sustainability, or social value, however you want to term it, because the principles of it are very similar, you really do need to make sure that it's embedded across the organisation so that the whole organisation is working to that North Star. And then you can start to make the changes that are required. I think in many regards what was happening is that the procurement is moving at a faster pace than the rest of the organisation. And one really good illustration of that is budgets. We need to rethinking about procuring sustainably. There's research evidence which suggests it costs more. The research evidence that says that it doesn't. I think it depends on the category of spend. It depends maybe on the geography of where you are when you're procuring. It depends on a number of different factors. But ultimately, if we're looking to more long-term solutions, we're looking at being more preventative. The first question we ask is, do we need to buy it at all? The second one we then to think about is, if we're going to procure, do we have local suppliers to do that? And that's logical, isn't it? It makes sense to do that. And I don't know that that's necessarily that joining up is what's, was happening maybe 10, 15 years ago, as to what we now know is starting to really emerge now and is becoming quite a widespread trend. And I think that the pandemic period, the COVID pandemic, really elevated the importance of that mindset that has to go through the organisation to be prepared, to be more resilient, to be more agile, and to value the supply community that we have around us and why we need to use those.
Just picking up on what you just said, two key points which jump out at me is process and the introduction of transforming public procurement coming in 2025. And the challenge is that, and the budget may have two key elements like social and how procurement can continue to support against other challenges, probably focused on the traditional cost reduction.
There's still quite a lot in there, but I think so. Let's think about, first of all. So the great news is that the Procurement Act 2023 will go live, so will be enforceable from 24th of February 2025. I see this, and a lot of colleagues see this. I count myself as colleagues with other procurement professionals. I see us all as one. So when I say we, I'm referring to all of us collectively. See it as a huge opportunity. We've got an opportunity now to do things right. Number one, it's simplifying procurement process. There are three main routes to procurement. That's easier for the procurement professional to make a decision. It's easier for the supply market to not feel that they're missing something, that there's something that's the game of poker, as it were. Yeah. So I think that's really important. I think number two, in terms of budgetary constraints, those are never going to go away, are they? But what's something that's really important in the development with the new Act is pipeline. And basically the requirement is, and it's already starting to happen to prepare for next year, is that public bodies have to advertise a pipeline of contract opportunities that are likely to come up in the next 12 months. Now, this is fantastic news from both sides, from buyer and supply sides, because it gives everybody opportunity to plan. It gives opportunity to think about where social value can best be embedded. It gives opportunity to think about the budget constraints and but importantly, how we overcome them. It gives suppliers opportunity to maybe think about forming a consortium. It gives people opportunity to prepare their own supply chain to maybe scale up their business if they're a smaller business. So I see this pipeline as a really important opportunity. And what's important here is that when we talk about embedding sustainable principles into procurement, it's not going to happen on its own. It has to happen across the organisation. This is a mindset change and a whole governance issue here that needs to be embedded. And that's why I think initially back in 2018, 2020, it was still a bit of a struggle. Some people get it, some people don't. That's not enough. If you want to follow that North Star, if you want to achieve more sustainable outcomes, meaningful outcomes for people who need it most, this is something that needs to start individually but be really embedded deeply across the culture of the whole organisation. And then you're all singing from the same hymn sheet, aren't you? Yeah. But I mean, instantly it means that you haven't got conflicting objectives going on within the organisations and tensions that can happen. And that particularly comes up when it gets to measurement of what we're trying to achieve here, when it comes to social value outcomes. So for every £1 spent, how much of that is reinvested into the local economy? How many people have benefited from employment that perhaps would never have had that opportunity? Have we exposed school children to a career opportunity they perhaps would never even have considered? You know, all of these kind of things. And so it gives us much more opportunity to plan. It also means that more voluntary sector organisations can get involved because there is that time. I think what we've had before with the procurement process as it was before is you're trying to set up a massive piece of procurement in 2 or 3 weeks. Where's the innovation then? You know, it is only going to be about cost. And it's going to be a very unfair playing field when it comes to the supply market opportunities, because the largest organisations have already got the capacity and the resources there to be able to prepare for those opportunities that come up. So I think that this is going to really widen opportunities, and in itself that will create social value. So I think that's really important going forward. So while I think that, you know, budgetary constraints are never going to go away, I do feel that the whole sustainability agenda is really forcing us to think differently about what we procure, why we're procuring it, and then how we go about procuring it as well. So I think there's, you know, really, I am very, very hopeful about what the future will bring.
Jane, that was really fascinating. And I'd just like to pick up on what you were talking about, innovation, to develop that, because we've had some really big thoughts there already from you and from Gareth as well. Thank you both. In terms of procurement driving innovation, what's that key thought from you? What's your key message on that?
Well, here's another example, Gareth, of where academic science informs practice and vice versa. So actually in 2021, we published a paper on exactly this, about understanding, as a result of the pandemic, what that was doing to innovation. What we looked at first of all is, does a policy for innovation exist in a country before the pandemic and after the pandemic? And we looked at then, was there a strategy for innovation, for managing innovation? We looked at tender notices and whether the word innovation was actually mentioned. So I think it's an interesting one. There was definitely, so go back to that paper, there was definitely an upward trend post-pandemic and a move towards being, to prioritising innovation. But I think, let's think about sustainability and innovation. I'd like to think that one day we come to the point where we don't have to use those terms, because what we're doing every day should be sustainable and it should be innovative. We should always be looking for developing new solutions, new products that are better than the ones we had yesterday. And procurement, of course, is positioned to be very much part of that journey and responsible for developing and helping to developing, creating the opportunity for those innovations to develop. What's particularly interesting, I think, is that we see procurement as very much at the forefront of driving innovation, but it's not going to happen unless you've got economic stimulus packages as well. So I think there's a fantastic paper published by Sandra Hamilton from University of Manchester, and she says procurement a market shaper or a price taker. For too long, governments have focused on lowest cost and not getting best value. What we mean by best value, value for money, is really thinking about, is it innovative? Is it a new solution? Is it better than the one we had today? And importantly, does it embed sustainable values in the way that we procure it and what it offers as well? So I think that, we really do need to learn from that and think about how influential procurement is in terms of shaping the supply market. A report was updated a couple of weeks ago from the UK Cabinet Office. I was quite shocked and concerned, stats on the SME. We talk about SME, but actually I think it's very much a European term. The UK is very much a micro and small business economy. Let's not bones about that. The stats that came out in that SME guidance document from UK Cabinet Office said that I think it was 99.2% of businesses are employing less than 50 people. That's across the whole of the UK. That means that our supply market, if you're a public sector buyer, that means that our supply market is highly fragmented. What we need to make sure is that our processes ensure a fair competition for those small businesses to make sure that they're delivering that innovation. One of the challenges for small businesses to supply the public sector is their ability to scale up and quickly. And so what you kind of need there, and what we learned from the pandemic period, is how initiatives from the Department for Economy have to align with initiatives from the Department for Finance, where I've seen some fantastic initiatives. SBRI, for example, Small Business Research Initiatives looking at innovation in healthcare. I've supported them very many times. And you see some amazing innovations coming forward that would really transform people's lives. Getting them procured is another step forward. So first of all, the stimulus package that says, this is our challenge. We want you to now go out and see if you can innovate in this particular area and come up with some great solutions. And I think that element works really well. What we then need to do is this other piece of work, community of practice, to then think about how can we then translate that into meaningful procurement outcomes so that we're actually buying those services, but doing it in a legitimate way, which means that we're, not falling foul of procurement law and that we are compliant, should we say, and we're being fair and open in competition. So I think innovation is going to be absolutely key going forward, particularly with the net zero agenda, because for many of us, we're still modelling our way through. We're still quoting data, but still questioning ourselves, is it accurate enough? What is accurate enough? And we're advancing at such a rapid stage. We've got AI, artificial intelligence, it's really coming into everything that we do, every part of our day. And while I'm quite sceptical as a bit of an oldie about what artificial intelligence is doing us for our mind, I think it's making us a bit lazy. Nevertheless, it's capable of really, doing some fantastic things with very large data sets and transforming, giving us the knowledge that would have taken us days, months, years to be able to do before. But I think that we need to be able to grasp all of these opportunities to make more meaningful outcomes in terms of delivering our innovation outcomes for better public service delivery. And what we're looking at here then is about, and I think Austerity Global is a new organisation that's come in, and I was quite interested to see in their strategy. What they really talk about here is about not just about spending, it's about investing. So we're using taxpayers' money to buy goods and services, but rather than looking at it as a short-term cost implication, it should be a long-term investment. So if we're buying more innovative and more sustainably, then hopefully the longer term public sector overhead costs should be lowered. Better value outcomes for people, particularly when it comes to health, particularly when it comes to nutrition, food and so on would be another great example here. So some really interesting examples. I know Cardiff Capital Region constantly have challenge fund calls where they invite suppliers to come in and to share and to discuss what the art of the possible is, what can be done. Then we can think about whether it's cost effective and how we make it cost effective to be able to be procured.
I think it's really interesting, to be honest with you, because I see the challenges facing more public, but then it's quite interesting from a private sector background. We often build in innovation into our sourcing processes. We identify areas of innovation, hopefully quite early-ish on, and we then lose it. As it transitions through the life cycle, it's identified in sourcing, it's actioned in sourcing, then we move to contract management, and it could be a 3-year, 5-year contract, but we're not really circling back to then say with suppliers, what additional innovation is there? And it's one of those areas I think stifles innovation within private, and that might be a bit too critical of all businesses, but in my experience, it happens more often than not. And driving that innovation through there at that contract management piece could stop and help private from going back out to the market, engaging with more SMEs and forming that collaborative relationship, which I do think from a procurement perspective, we sometimes are hesitant to do, to ensure we have the right relationship with our suppliers to almost the buyer-supplier, not the collaborative.
My take on this is, that innovation in the private sector is basically whether you're going to stay in business or not. It's competition. You have to innovate in the private sector to remain competitive. Innovation in the public sector is about public value. And I think, that's why I think we have to move more into the innovation space. I think, and what's really, again, another key element. So I was one of the few people that really was pro innovation partnerships. And I loved the concept of innovation partnership, which came from the European Commission, because any innovation requires R&D investment. A company has to invest, and it's very difficult to recover that cost unless they're selling that product out in mass, and then they can start to recover that cost. So look at the product life cycle model, or any model, or those other academic scientific frameworks that you can use, but they help us and they guide us to understand how we embed innovation, at what point we should be embedding innovation, and actually what it costs to the business, how we recover that cost in the business, and so on. And the public sector, if you like, are lagging behind the private sector in that regard. What I liked about the innovation partnership is that you could procure the R&D element first of all, and encourage the suppliers to work in partnership with you. It was that partnership part of the innovation that was the bit that was tricky, because that's a behaviour which is not comfortable for some, but very comfortable for others. And so there were some really great examples of it. But a lot of lawyers thought that was very too risky, because the idea then is that once you've developed the innovation, you don't then have to go back out to market to procure. And that's exactly what was happening. Yeah. So it meant it was a one-stage process rather than a two-stage process. The new Procurement Act actually embeds R&D and accepts that R&D may need to be procured. And I think the fact that it's mentioned in there, even though I don't think innovation is mentioned in there enough, I think it does give those who are understanding and wanting to be more innovative in terms of goods and services that they're buying in, it gives them the license to be able to do that in a more sustainable way, so that we deliver better outcomes for everybody.
Both of you, that was a really fascinating piece, and I know we could even go further on that, but I wanted to pick up on the collaboration word that you mentioned, Jane, and to just take that a little bit further in terms of how important is that collaboration now between the public sector, the private sector, and indeed community organisations, because we've both had some experience of this, Gareth, haven't we?
Oh, absolutely. Attending ProcureX Wales was very insightful. And what you did, Jane, in regards to bringing in local businesses to give them a platform in front of public sector procurement. And I think it's not just collaboration, there's also innovation. So it's great to see that level of thought go into it.
I think that's really important, and there are a lot of discussions, as you can imagine, in the run up to ProcureX about how we best go about that, how we make it fair. And this is the first time that this was actually trialled, and I actually felt that having micro businesses and third sector organisations, social enterprise being exhibited at ProcureX actually completely changed the culture of the whole show. And I think it was a success. It's the first time we've trialled it. We've got a lot of lessons to learn from it. But basically the idea was, well, of course, we've got 96% of businesses in Wales, probably a bit more, are micro firms employing less than 10 people. If we're spending between 8 and 10 billion, dependent on some of the digital accuracy data reports that are coming out versus self-reported data, you're looking at anywhere upwards to around about 10 billion a year on goods and services. What we've got to make sure in Wales is that, of course, that those opportunities are going to be open to the smaller business, the business that employs fewer people. And of course, because of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and because we know it's the right thing to do, is that we need to really be seen to be providing opportunities for social enterprise where there is not-for-profit as an agenda, for voluntary sector who had enormous amounts of benefit and value in terms of how we can better procure goods and services. You know, smaller businesses are the closest to the community needs. They really understand what's going on, so why wouldn't you want to use them? So I think what we've got now is we are starting to now get a process which will enable us to do that. So from a procurement perspective, that's going to be starting to be a bit more possible. Back in 2012, we wrote a joint bidding guide, which is still publicly available and is soon to be updated, which helps and supports small businesses to bid jointly if they want to be able to grow their business, but maybe don't see that as an opportunity. We also, in ProcureX, they promoted the use of frameworks and how important it is to be part of a framework if you want to have public sector opportunities. But when we wanted to showcase these social enterprise this year, we started to think about, well, you know, there's so many, where do we even start? So we used the foundational economy principles. So we looked at what the foundational economy sector is in Wales and the different industry sectors, and it felt that we decided that we were going to use one sector each year. So this year we already know there's been some great strides made in food and food supply chains, particularly getting more nutritious food and into schools and hospitals. So I thought that was a pretty good place to start. So we already know there's been a bit of progress. So let's springboard on that progress and let's showcase some of the great work that's been done. And of course, Sian, you know, it was great to have you exhibiting as well, and with the Food and Drink Awards as well. So again, all of these great initiatives that are happening, rather than happening in silo and the supply market being very confused by them, let's pull them all together so that we have a joined up conversation. Now we're starting to innovate. Now we're starting to embed social value. Now we're starting to think about future generations. and we're going to deliver more meaningful outcomes. So I would like to think that this is just the start of a very long journey, but it's absolutely essential that we now appeal to and change the stigma that's been associated with public procurement, and the door to say that the door is now very much open. The public sector want to hear from small businesses, to listen to the innovations that they have, to understand some of the geographical challenges that we might face in Wales, but to collectively to think about, and that's where the collaboration piece will come in, Sian, is to think about how we can overcome some of the hurdles that we face and how collectively we can make things better for end users, for the community in which the public services serve. So collaboration is going to be absolutely key. Collaboration requires having the right process, having a system which is consistent and that is accessible to all. But importantly, it also requires specific behaviours. It's about building a community of trust. It's about an element of change. It's about being committed to that process of change. And I think that that's the bit that still needs a little bit of work to be done. And as you probably already know, I'm a strong advocate of collaborative working, mostly because of all the bad experiences I had in my early days as a buyer of people saying, we're your partner, and not acting like a partner. So I think, apply the same principles as you do in your personal life, in business, and think about, who do you want to trade with? How do we build our reputation together? And, collectively we can think much more. The African proverb is do things alone, but do things together and you'll walk much further. So I think that we have to now think about how we apply collaborative working as a nation between buy and supply sides, and embracing all of the knowledge and the experiences and the accessibility in many regards. Non-government organisations, third sector charities are the gateway to the community. So, the public sector need that gateway to understand what the needs are. How would you know what to be prioritising otherwise? So I think that's going to be really, really important. So there is actually an international standard for collaborative working, and they've just recently launched some guidance for small businesses as well on collaborative working as well. So you haven't necessarily got to apply all of the principles, but it does give you a guidance, a framework to follow, to make sure that it's going to, most collaboration starts, let's be honest, when the project arrives in your inbox. Right, let's do this great project. Right, who's going to be available on Thursday at 12 o'clock? Never mind, are they the right people? Yeah? We've got to start thinking in a different way when we talk about collaboration. We've got to make sure, have we got the right people around the table? If we haven't, let's use our networks to find them, and let's make sure that we get the right people around the table, because otherwise we're just muddling through and we'll never really achieve the optimal outcomes that were possible if we didn't do it properly. So again, I think that pipeline will give us the window of opportunity to enable collaborative working to be a much more powerful force to deliver more meaningful outcomes for the people that need it.
Wow, Jane, we could talk with you for another 2 hours, I know.
Sorry.
But no, don't apologise.
We've barely scratched it, have we?
It's absolutely fascinating and such a pleasure chatting with you. But we're
Likewise.
Coming towards the end of our time. So I'm going to hand over to Gareth for this one, because one of the reasons for this podcast is to shine a light on the power of procurement, but obviously also as procurement as a career. So it's Gareth, over to you to grill Jane on this final question.
So, Jane, for our younger listeners or those considering a career change, why are you happy that you chose procurement as a career, and what has made it fulfilling for you?
It's never going to be fulfilled because there's always more to do. And is there any other career? Come on, let's be honest. Even as a journalist, you're in procurement now, Sian. Everybody's trapped. Because we're all buyers. As individuals, we're all buyers. We all buy our own goods and services. That's what keeps us going in this world, isn't it? So why not apply it in a business context and understand the importance of getting it right? One of the phrases I use in teaching is, your business is only as good as your weakest supplier. So if you use poor suppliers who've got a bad reputation or never really, optimizing quality, then it's going to have an impact on your reputation, not them, because you're the one who has to deal with the reputation. And so I think really, really important to, it's a fantastic career. There are so many opportunities, and we haven't got enough buyers. So we need more. We need more experts in this field. So yeah, we've got 2 MSc programs here accredited with SIPS, and I can't get enough people on that course really. We've got an undergraduate program which has got modules, elective modules. The University of South Wales has accredited programs. There's lots of opportunities out there wherever you're based. Definitely think about it. If you're late in life, it's never too late. Look at what happened to me. I was 31 going back to university. That's crazy, isn't it? And I can't remember how old I was doing my PhD, but way too old. There's never a right time. And I think, if you've got that desire to get out there and train in procurement, let's remember our early conversations, Gareth. How did I meet you?
Yeah, I've been 20, 21.
Yes. Yeah.
And
the world's at your oyster. Yeah. You could have done anything you wanted.
Yeah, and I fell into procurement.
And I feel that could be a whole other podcast.
You can.
Jane, you're so inspiring. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you both. Lovely.
It's been our pleasure.
Thank you.
That wraps up this episode of Powering Procurement. We hope you enjoyed that as much as we did.
Visit our website at atamis.co.uk or follow us on LinkedIn to continue the conversation.
Remember to subscribe on YouTube and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you choose to listen.
Thanks for joining us, and see you next time on Powering Procurement. The Powering Procurement podcast is brought to you by Atamis, source to contract software designed to save you time and money. Choose the apps you need, from pipeline and tender management to supplier and contract management. Get the tools to power up your procurement. Visit atamis.co.uk to learn more.